Hello.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Fine.
Looks like you have nice weather over there. We have our last day of sunshine in Connecticut for like a week.
We've actually just come through an extended period of showers, thunderstorms, and partly cloudy weather, which is highly unusual. So today is the first really cloudless day we've had in, a couple of weeks, which is unusual, very unusual.
I have good timing.
Yeah, good. Bring it on.
Really. So, Glenn, can we start by introduce yourself? And what I'd like to ask is how you got to the wine game. Like, what do you do now, and how did you get there? Because some people were
Right.
born with it, some people knew they wanted to do it as a child, and some people just fell in. I like to hear the story.
Well, okay. Well, my name is Glen Creasy. I come from upstate New York originally, so grew up in the Finger Lakes region. I've watched with interest some of your interviews with the people there. It brings back lots of good memories.
Yeah.
But I have been away from the States for a very long time now. I grew up there. I was the son of an academic. So my father worked as a fruit tree or a fruit scientist at Cornell University. And I guess, he was my role model because I knew before I got out of high school that I wanted to study plants. So I did a pomology degree, a tree fruit science degree at Cornell. And in my final year, they had a single viticulture course. So I took that course, and that's when I was bitten by the bug. And I decided this is what I want to do. I was lucky enough to work with some researchers like Dr. Bob Poole and a little bit under the guidance of Nelson Shawless, who's quite famous in viticulture circles, at the Geneva Experiment Station, where I worked with them over a summer. Well, it's actually 2 summers. I worked with them doing little research projects and finding out about the grape industry in New York State. And that was really, really formative. And a kind of a final nail in the coffin was my parents bought some land in upstate New York specifically to grow seedless table grapes,
Okay.
which was highly, highly unusual in one, growing table grapes in New York, and 2, growing seedless table grapes in New York. So they bought some vines of a grape variety called Einset that was released from the Geneva Experiment Station breeding program, and bought some very, very early releases from that. They had to be tissue cultured to be propagated so that they had enough to plant. And so they were trying to establish this commercial, small, but commercial table grape operation. Around the same time, I was doing these research experiments and taking the viticulture class, and it all kind of gelled for me. I just really enjoyed working with grapevine because it's so plastic. You can do so many things with it. So I knew I wanted to stay and learn more about the grapevine. So after I finished my degree at Cornell, I managed to get a graduate research assistantship to work with researchers at Oregon State University.
Okay.
So I flew across country, and this was in the 1980s, and it was a really, late 1980s, a really exciting time for Oregon, because at that time the plantings were expanding wildly. Interest in Pinot Noir was growing and growing, and so I was at the at the growing end of that, and it was such a vibrant industry with really, really interesting people in it that were driving this growth. And I really, really enjoyed my time in Oregon, working in cooler climates with grape varieties, learning about the grapevine, and talking to commercial growers while I was doing my research project as part of my master's. And then after I finished my master's, I did a PhD, and I just couldn't get enough, and I wanted to continue in research. So I found a postdoctoral position in Australia. So I went from cool climate, relatively small industry, to central New South Wales. I was based in Wagga Wagga, which is basically in the middle of nowhere in Australia. And that's all hot climate, some very large commercial operations, different grape varieties, different wine styles. I kind of got the other side of the coin in growing grapes in a hot area climate with sort of different goalposts. It was a completely different playing field. Although they had their cool climate areas, relatively speaking, as well. I really enjoyed my time there working with the researchers and getting to know people in Australia. And by that point, I'd had some research under my belt. I had some time to work with commercial growers. And I managed to land a job in New Zealand with Lincoln University as an academic. So I started in as a lecturer and a researcher, and there's all the other things go along with a bit of unofficial extension. And really, again, New Zealand was really in its ramp-up phase at that point. Sauvignon Blanc had just exploded. There was, thousands of acres of grapevines being planted every year. Export was driving it all. It was very, very exciting. And again, some really, really interesting people that were part of this whole new world of winemaking and grape growing.
Yeah.
And I spent actually almost 20 years there. As in that lecturer position, doing research and teaching students and doing my research projects. Fantastic time to be in New Zealand. It's just such a wonderful industry, and I've learned so much by being in New Zealand and being associated with the industry there. Some wonderful, wonderful people. But my wife, Kirsten, who's a winemaker, and I sort of figured, we really enjoyed New Zealand. Fantastic place to be. I mean, if anybody has a chance to go, you should go because it's worth it. But we wanted a new challenge. We had planted a very small vineyard there to purposely make sparkling wine. So we planted some Pinot Noir, a nice hillside site near Lincoln University. Excuse me. And that was working out really well. It was really nice to get some more practical experience under my belt. But we decided we needed a change. We wanted another challenge. So we never do anything a small way. So we decided we'd uproot the kids and ourselves, basically sell up everything there and move to France and try to start our own wine business. And Kirsten had been a flying winemaker back in the 1990s, and she had done winemaking through France as part of that. So she had worked away from the southern parts of France up to the northern parts, working and making wine, commercial wine for companies like Sainsbury's in the UK. And she had fallen in love with the Languedoc back then. And we visited in 2016. We had a look. We were primarily based around Saint-Chinian. And when we saw the prices of grape land in the area and the kinds of vineyards you could buy for not much money, really old established vines, and the climate, it's just a nice place to be. We said, okay, that's it. Let's pull the trigger and let's do it. So effectively, we moved over about 2 years later, a little less than actually. And we happily met up with a French couple, Hélène and Remy, who were looking to buy a winery. They didn't have any production experience. Kirsten and I had lots of production experience. They had marketing and financial expertise, so it was a match made in heaven. And we managed to find a property here in the Upper Hérault, in the Languedoc. And the department is the Hérault department. It's the same department that Montpellier is in. So we're about 45 minutes north of Montpellier. And we think it's a wonderful little patch of ground up here, and we're very, very happy to be here. It's been quite an amazing journey. It's all happened very quickly, but it has been extremely satisfying, and it's been a roller coaster ride these past couple of years, basically from 2018 when we sort of got into this particular property. So it's been wonderful, hard but wonderful.
That's a good story. So before we actually get into talking about your property and your wines, I think you're the right person to ask this to. Why is Riesling particularly resistant to really cold weather? And does it have anything to do with sap rising? And one of the things I just recently kind of understand is that sap starts to rise up and then it freezes and expands. Is that why things don't last through a super cold winter? Or
yeah, that's effectively what it is. I mean, there are some genetic differences between varieties and species as to how much cold they can handle in the dormant season. And I think Riesling has a couple of things going for it. One is that it is able to withstand cold temperatures in the winter because effectively what a plant does to resist freezing temperatures is to withdraw water because water freezes, and when it freezes, it expands, and that breaks all the cells, cell walls, and cell membranes, and that's what kills the tissues. But what they can do is try to reduce the amount of water. So, for example, during the growing season, we have nice green shoots. There's lots of water in those shoots. As you get to later in the season and towards the winter, they go brown. They become harder, and the water content decreases. So there's less water. And then they're also able to load effectively what is used as an antifreeze into the water that is in the cells. So they basically load types of sugar compounds into the sap and the cell fluids, which means that it's more resistant to freezing because there's lots of solutes in it. It ties up the water and keeps it from freezing. So genetically, Riesling is able to do that a little bit better than other vinifera varieties. And also it tends to break bud later in the season. So that means it starts to move its sap a little bit later than other varieties. And so therefore it's a little bit more resistant as you get into the springtime period.
Awesome. I could sit here like this and ask crazy nerdy questions. But my not nerdy, but I think you're going to have the answer. Why? I mean, there's interesting cider made from apples and pears, but why grapes? Why do grapes give us such a breadth of fascinating and incredibly complex, and not carrots or peaches?
Yeah, I always go around saying nobody ever talks about what a great season 2008 was for peas. No, grapes are very special, and I think most people I think would agree it's because grapes have the right balance of sugar and acid compounds, so that when it's fermented, it is pleasing to the human palate. So grapes, generally speaking, have more sugar in them than other fruits. So with cider and other things, if you ferment the juice, you get like 5-6% alcohol. With grapes, if you get 14% alcohol, you don't have to add any sugar. The grapes get that naturally, and that's relatively unusual. And the other thing is that grapes are relatively high in tartaric acid, which is a very stable acid. It doesn't drop out too easily, and it stays and is a companion for the other components of the wine. People talk about acid in a wine as providing a backbone. It's important because a lot of other things hang off of it, the flavors and the mouthfeel sensations and all those sorts of things. So just by happenstance, the vinifera grape turns out to be the one that when you ferment it, it turns into a drink that many people find pleasing. Okay. I mean, I find cider pleasing too, but in a different way,
Yeah, no, but that I don't think many people without your experience could really make it that easy to understand. So thank you very much.
Well, I hope it was.
Great, yeah. I've wondered that for so long. So tell me about where you are, because I've just recently learned Terre de Larzac makes some of the most exciting wine, and you have some of that. So can you explain? There are some just wine lovers, maybe not super educated in the wine world, and then there are some wine nerds here. So can you kind of give a broad about Languedoc and then where you are and which you make some IGP and all that? Tell us about
Right. Okay. So, well, I suppose everybody knows that the Languedoc is a really big area. So it's much of the southern part of France. So we are located sort of at the upper tip of the Languedoc. So we're actually pretty close to the Rhone, and Provence is not that far away. So our environmental conditions are quite different to those that are further down in the main part of the Languedoc. And as well, we are at sort of the upper northern extreme. So one of the nice things about this particular location is that we are in a relatively small, secluded valley. The winds here are probably a little bit more persistent here, which is great for keeping disease away. And we are close to the Cevennes Mountains to the north. So the Cevennes Mountains and the extra altitude that we have here, we're about 200 meters, provide us with some cooler temperatures. We get quite warm during the day. I mean, it could easily get up to 90 degrees during the day during the summer, or much more in some cases. But at the nighttime, we get some cooling breezes coming off the mountains, and that means our grapes retain a bit of acidity that otherwise might be metabolized away. And that helps, again, provide a backbone for the wines, and generally we think can create a more elegant style of wine than if we were in Saint-Chinian, for example, where it's very hot and it's even hotter than here, and the wines can sometimes, not always, but sometimes be a bit soft. So we are in the very northern part of Languedoc, so yeah, higher elevation, different climate. The varietal mix is somewhat similar, but yeah, it's quite distinct in its own right.
And then which appellations and what wines do you make, basically, is what I want to ask.
Oh boy, okay. Well, we have 35 hectares here, so it's a big estate, and we do a whole range of wines that go from bag and box through to bottle, and we do some sweet wines as well. The appellations that we produce are IGP, IGP Saint-Guillaume, a specialized version that's that we put our top label into. We do Languedoc, we do Terre de Larzac, we do Vin de France, and I think that's it.
And out of what grapes? What's the breadth of your grapes that you grow?
Well, in New Zealand, what we have a fruit salad. So we have 16 now different varieties. The bulk of which are Syrah, Grenache, Carignan, and about 20% of our varieties are white in terms of area, which suits us fine. I think, we think that in this particular area, white is especially good because we have a bit of the cooler temperatures that help retain the acidity in the whites. So much of what we make is red. At the moment, much of what we make is sold bag and box. But that's great, especially in these recent days with the confinement. We found that the bag and box is selling quite well, whereas people have drawn back a little bit on the bottles they purchase. But the plan is to sort of switch around and slowly grow our market to be mostly bottles. But the bag and box is still a very good market, and we're selling both 5-liter bag and box and 3-liter bag and box, trying to meet different aspects of the market.
Yeah. So a lot of like smaller wineries. So one of the things I've learned about doing all these interviews with people is there are some wineries that their model was basically 80% to restaurants and 20% to retail, and they got hurt the worst by the confinement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially in California, that had their own wine clubs and were about 30% direct to consumer, 30% retail. Mm-hmm. Wine, they seem to last the most, but you don't really see, or in my experience, so maybe I'm uninformed, but in France, can you sell I mean, I know you can pull up to a restaurant and say, here, do you want to buy some wine? And there's some of that, but can you sell over a website, or do people buy via website in France? Yeah. Is that more of a cult thing, or how do you sell your wine is my other question, basically.
Well, okay, no, you certainly can sell online, and the confinement that we had was a big push for us to develop our own online store. Okay. We would always plan to do it, but it certainly accelerated that. I think with the confinement, a lot of people who wouldn't have ordinarily purchased things online started to purchase things online. So I think it will be a bigger thing in the future. People are more comfortable with it. But we sell our wines primarily because the bulk of what we produce is bag and box, primarily to grocery stores. Okay. That's where most of our volume goes. But we also sell to wine shops. We sell to restaurants. We sell to épiceries, corner shops. Much of the market that the previous owner had for the wines was local. Within, like an hour's drive, but not even including Montpellier. So we are, to increase our bottled wine market, we are expanding that, and we're going further afield to the larger cities, where basically the market can absorb more wine that's in bottle rather than bag and box. So right now we're selling basically through any of the channels that you could possibly think of. We've exported some, we've selling to restaurants and wine shops, everything.
And does that work? Is there still, because in New York particularly, we don't have grocery stores that can sell wine, so I'm very out of touch. Is wine leaving your place going to a grocery store still a pallet to a distributor, or is it different, selling to a store?
No, we're selling mostly direct. Yep.
So that mean the grocery store actually comes and picks up a pallet or cases?
Well, we deliver it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. It's so different.
Yes.
I don't know much about the Terre de Larzac. Can you tell me about that and tell me about what wine you make and why for me it's one of the more exciting wines that I've tasted. geographically wise that make really good wine?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the real draws to this particular domain, because it does have a reasonable amount of terrace land. Um, Terrace de Larzac's a relatively young appellation, so it's really only been around and formally recognized for 15 years.
Okay.
So that's a baby in terms of appellations, right? So it is, for the wine geeks out there that know about it, there are a lot of people that are very excited about it. And I think it's because it is somewhat different than the other areas. So Pic Saint Loup, have you heard of Pic Saint Loup? It's basically right next to us. But Terrace de Larzac, particularly in the area where we are, where we're a little bit higher elevation, it can make wines, I think, that have more character. You do find a lot of wines that are, just very nice red wines. But I think with those vineyards in places that are a little bit special, you can make something that really does stand out. And the whole thing that we're trying to do is build a relationship with all of our vineyards. And for myself and Kirsten, it's about discovering the character of each of these vineyards and trying to express that character through all the way through into the bottled wine. So I think Terrace de Larzac, even though it's young, it reminds me in some ways of the industry in Oregon, 30 years ago, and the industry in New Zealand 20 years ago, where there are a lot of really enthusiastic people here that believe in the terroir. And there are a lot of people really pushing the region, trying to make really, really interesting wines, and, have a point of difference. And that's, enthusiasm, I think, after having, taught, there's thousands of students have gone through my classes. The one thing that always stood out with students is those that have enthusiasm are the ones that generally will go off and do good things. It's not about the marks necessarily they got in all their courses. And enthusiasm in an industry, the people that are driving the industry, is really what pushes it forward, because they're the ones that are willing to take the risks. They're the ones going the extra mile. So Terrace de Larzac, I think, is one of those reasons, and we're really happy to be part of that, because we sort of fit in with that mindset. We're very enthusiastic about what we've got here, and we want to make the best wines we can. So it's a good match for us.
So people that go into these little regions, and particularly the new, young, enthusiastic winemakers, like you say, are, it seems to me, just making a younger, fresher, more vibrant style of wine a little bit. Mm-hmm. Is that due to it's just young people doing their own thing, or is there there's science more and they can tell temperature more precisely, maybe pick earlier, or why is that happening, that fresher style is coming along? Maybe it's just Beaujolais got so popular and they're emulating Beaujolais.
Well, it would be difficult to say, but I think, yeah, similar to what you just said, I think that the younger generation generally, their wine education is very different. So they've grown up being exposed to New World wines. Mm-hmm. A century ago, if you were in France, you didn't experience any New World wines. So all you knew was what was being produced. And tradition and conservatism rules in France to a large extent. It's only the newer, younger people that come in with different ideas and who are willing to experiment and try new things that really you move the industry away from what was done for centuries to something that is a bit different. And that's, again, why the Languedoc, I think, attracted us, because it is a little bit like the Wild West of winemaking. Land is inexpensive, so anybody can come in and start something up. You can grow your grapes and sell your wine under a number of different appellations and make a go of it. So you find a lot of people coming in from the outside. In fact, we're in a group called the Outsiders, which is made up of people that have come from outside of the Languedoc region, whether it be from other places in France or other countries. And it's very interesting to see how each of the members of that group have put their own spin on, winemaking in the Languedoc.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think would be hard as a winemaker is to stand out. And you have a very, very big region already. And now, like, I think you might know Carrie Sumner in the Roussillon, and we've talked about that. So I kind of follow the Roussillon is sort of developing its own identity. when I went to wine school, everybody was just like Languedoc Roussillon, and Roussillon was kind of like the afterthought, but now it's distinguishing itself. But now the French government has kind of lumped that with Southwest France, and it's Occitanie, and now even more. Is that changing things, or it's not really a big thing to stand out in your region?
Well, I don't think the legislative changes really make any difference. I mean, the advantage to the appellation system is that it gives an unknown some guarantee for a buyer, supposedly. So if you produce a wine under the Languedoc appellation, there's an implicit guarantee there that the wine is going to be a certain level of quality. The reality is, if you do your marketing smartly, you don't need to use that. It makes it easier, I think, and that's our strategy, is to use those appellations to get our wines out there for people to try them, and slowly build up, the wines that are non-appellation. We think the future is ultimately non-appellation, not Terre, Larzac necessarily, or Languedoc. It's about making a wine that expresses our terroir, our particular bit of land, the best. And that's probably going to be a mixture of varieties that are not permitted for those other appellations. So I think, it's an ever-changing situation here, and that's again what makes it exciting. I think it's good to keep an open mind.
Yeah, in all things.
Yeah.
Can you tell people the name where you got the name of your winery, the
Terre de Source? Yeah. Well, that was Remy and Helen's idea. It's based on a physical reality and based on a concept. So the physical reality is that in this property there are two springs nearby, two major springs that feed the two rivers, or streams really they are at this point, that flow through the property. So they're just basically a little bit north of us. In fact, if I switch the camera around. Excuse me, I'm going to look at... So I'll give you a bit of a brief view. So at the moment, the camera is pointing north.
Okay.
So this is almost the edge of our property, but basically beyond us in the area are two springs, and they run through down the streams that come here. So we have two springs, and in French, the spring is the source. As well, there are two couples that have come together. So there's two different sources of inspiration and ideas, et cetera, and there are a number of different countries involved. I mean, sort of New Zealand or the New World and the Old World. So Terre de Source is the land of two springs, and effectively that's sort of what we are and what it is.
I love that. That's beautiful, by the way. That's the Cevennes to the north, you said.
This is, so we look to the north. The Cevennes are beyond us, the hills there, and they provide us with some nice cool air. And I pan across, I actually want to talk about this vineyard if I can a little bit, but we'll go through here. I'm moving towards the south now, and this is looking south and towards the village of Mont.
Oh. I don't know what happened. I think his camera might have overheated. We'll wait for him to come back, but what a smart guy. Gosh. There we go.
Sorry. So that's the village of Montoulier there. And if you keep going down south, that pretty much is where the Terre de Larzac region stretches, about 90 kilometers or so till you get to the other end of it. So we're at the very northeastern part. If I can, I just want to have a look into the vines here. These are some very old vines, among the oldest that we have on the property, a variety called Aramon. And Aramon was the bulk of what was planted in the Languedoc back in the mid-1900s. There were about 150,000 hectares of this grape planted, and it was planted because it is relatively resistant to the American diseases that were brought over in the 1800s, so downy mildew, powdery mildew, and supposedly a bit tolerant of phylloxera, the root louse. And so people planted it from the mid-1800s like crazy, and it was good because it was somewhat resistant, and also was a very high cropper. If you look it up on the web, they talk about 400 hectoliters per hectare which is insane, absolutely insane in terms of yield. 10 times what they sort of want you to have for Terre de Larzac. But of course, being such a high yielder, it doesn't produce a hugely wonderful wine. So if you make a red wine out of it, it turns into sort of a tepid little light red quaffing wine. And in the mid 1900s, other varieties started coming in, being imported from other areas like Carignan, which made a cheap wine, but which had a lot more character. So after 1950, they started pulling it out like crazy, and from 150,000 hectares, there's probably less than 3,000 now in France. So it's a bit sad. I think probably the métier of this variety will be rosé. We put it into some of our rosé, and it is very, very, very nice that way. Of course, our yields are nowhere near 400. I think they would struggle to be 35 hectoliters per hectare, but it's a bit unfortunate because this plot of land that I'm standing in right now is actually designated for AOP Terre de Larzac. Oh. So in terms of its value, it has quite a high value as Terre de Larzac, and because Aramon is not a variety that you can use in Terre de Larzac, it has no value for us as a Terre de Larzac. So ultimately, this block will be replanted, probably to Syrah, because we could use a bit more Syrah to go into our terrace. But the good news is that the bottom part of this block, lower down on the hill, it's not designated as Terre de Larzac. So we may actually be able to keep some of these grapes for heritage regions. These wines are planted in 1956, so they're pretty substantial, and we'd like to retain our history where we can.
For sure. Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you for showing us that. What a cool thing.
No, it's no problem. Yeah. We like our heritage here. We've got an old domain, which some of the foundations date back to Roman times, and coming from a new world, for me, it's like, oh wow, I can't believe that this building or this well that we have here is so old. I can't imagine anything so old that was created by humans. It's still a bit of a thrill for me coming from the United States.
Yeah, for sure. How cool. We're past the half-hour mark, so I'm going to let you go. But I want to ask, what's the state of the quarantine? Is it everything back to normal, or where are you guys now?
What's normal again? Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they're still limiting the size of gatherings, so large gatherings of people of hundreds or more is still not permitted. They say even personal gatherings shouldn't be more than 10 people. But all the stores are open. If you're in public, you're supposed to wear a mask. But other than that, yeah, things are more or less back to normal. France just announced this past weekend some more concrete details about opening up borders to neighboring countries. So now people can actually plan to do their vacations. This area here is a magnet for people wanting to get away from things. It's such a beautiful place. So we're hoping that, people do come back and experience it here. I just love coming out into the vineyards and working in the vineyards because there's so much life and it's so green, and it's really pretty wonderful location. So the quarantine for me personally wasn't too bad because I was considered an essential worker because I'm working in the vineyards, and of course the vines don't stop just because there's a quarantine. I got to come out every day and work in the vines and be outside, so I was very lucky.
Yeah, it's again being lucky. The bright side of things, it's good it happened when it did. If it had been harvest, would have been a little all of that.
Yeah,
so.
New Zealand had it tough. Yeah, they're right in the middle of it. Yeah.
Well, I got to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I learned so much. I'm gonna start DMing you all my crazy questions. So
Sure thing. No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'm gonna look for your wines very soon. Take care, man.
Awesome. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.